Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of clinical precision.
Right, like an exact science.
Yeah, exactly. Like you break your arm, the doctor takes an x-ray, and you just see that jagged white line against the black background.
It's completely visible. The fracture is just undeniable.
Undeniable. And the doctor just, taps the screen. There's a clear protocol for fixing it.
Which offers a tremendous amount of psychological comfort, honestly. We
Yeah.
really crave that kind of clear categorization, broken or whole.
Right, broken or whole. But I mean, step into the realm of diagnosing a whole society, like a culture or a collective human soul, and that x-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, completely. It's useless.
Yeah, because we're looking at a diagnostic landscape where the fractures aren't, physical lines. They're these invisible ruptures in trust, in shared meaning,
Yeah.
in the social contract itself.
And that is a very murky terrain to navigate.
It really is, and that's the exact terrain we're navigating today. For you, the listener, the learner, who really seeks to understand the foundational cracks in the world around us, without just drowning in the daily news cycle.
Because the daily news cycle just gives you the symptoms, not the disease.
Exactly. So today we are exploring a really profound, uncompromising source text. It's a Dutch book titled Van Massagraf tot Massive Verkrachting, which translates to From Mass Grave to Mass Rape.
That is a very intense title.
It is, and the subtitle kind of lays out the whole scope on the loss of dignity, alienation, religion, and the search for truth in a disrupted society. So our mission today for this deep dive is to track what happens when a society's shared values just, completely collapse.
And crucially, how an individual can forge an inner foundation when that external world feels so hollow.
Right, but we should do a quick tone check here because, this material touches on some incredibly intense human suffering.
Yes. It requires looking directly into some of the darkest corners of human behavior. The author isn't offering, a light political critique. This is an existential dissection.
So we are going to be wading into some deep ideological crossfires.
We are. And just as a disclaimer for our listeners, our role here is to impartially dismantle and examine these perspectives. We are analyzing these deeply charged cultural symptoms to understand the philosophical crisis, entirely independent of any political allegiance.
Yeah, we are absolutely not taking sides here. We're just reporting on the text. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The author starts with the most extreme manifestation of this societal crisis, right in the title: mass graves and mass sexual violence.
Right. The absolute terminus of societal collapse.
Yeah. And the central argument is that these aren't just, physical acts of warfare. They are engineered symbols.
Exactly. The author frames extreme violence as an act of ontological destruction. It's the deliberate obliteration of being.
Wow. Obliteration of being.
Yes. Consider the mechanics of a mass grave. It is not just about the cessation of biological life. It's this ultimate logistical effort to erase memory, identity, and dignity in a single stroke.
Because you're taking people with names and histories.
And you are compacting them into anonymous matter. It is a mathematical reduction of humanity to a zero. The purpose isn't just death, right? The purpose is the message that these people never mattered at all.
It's the total weaponization of anonymity.
Precisely.
And the text parallels this with mass sexual violence. Historically, in geopolitical conflicts, rape is utilized as a weapon of war. And the author argues its purpose goes far beyond just the trauma inflicted on a single body.
Because the physical body is the ultimate non-negotiable boundary of the self.
Right.
So when that boundary is violated on a mass systemic scale, it destroys the foundational concepts of trust and sanctuary for a whole community.
It's designed to humiliate them, to shatter their psychological infrastructure.
Exactly. The psychological message transmitted to the victims and to anyone who loves them is that you possess nothing that we cannot take. You have no safe harbor.
Which forcibly divorces a person from their own autonomy.
It's the absolute stripping of dignity. It tells a community they are utterly powerless.
Okay, so we have this extreme, visceral, physical violence at one end of the spectrum. But the author draws a continuum here, right? There's a secondary layer.
Yes, what they term cultural and spiritual violence. And it operates on the exact same philosophical frequency, just with different mechanics.
How does that look in everyday life?
Well, the author suggests violence exists on this long gradient. If the far end is the physical erasure in a mass grave, the subtle end is the spiritual erasure that occurs within, seemingly functioning societies.
Like when a group feels their core values aren't respected anymore.
Exactly. Imagine a community whose entire way of life, and maybe it's rooted in specific religious traditions or even historical industries, is systematically mocked or dismantled by the wider culture.
Because they feel like they don't belong.
Right. Over time, this creeping, profound alienation sets in. It's a form of spiritual violence, where individuals are subtly informed that they have no legitimate place in the modern world.
They become ghosts in their own society.
That's a great way to put it.
It's the slow suffocation of belonging. You're alive, but society tells you your worldview is like an obstacle to progress.
And this ties directly into how the text examines the role of women in society, historically and symbolically.
Yeah, I found this part really interesting. The author notes that across various cultures, women have often been elevated as symbols of civilization itself, embodiments of life and care and the future.
Right. Which on the surface sounds like reverence.
It sounds like a compliment.
It does. But the text is ruthless in deconstructing the hidden danger of that reverence. Societies are always trying to balance three volatile forces: freedom, safety, and tradition. The author argues that how a society treats women is the most accurate barometer of how it manages that balance. But when a society elevates women to mere symbols of its honor, it creates a crushing double reality for the women themselves.
Because they become a proxy for the culture's ego.
Precisely. The woman ceases to be an autonomous individual with her own flaws and desires. She becomes this heavily guarded monument.
Right.
She becomes the battlefield where ideologies wage war. A society will point to its women as proof of its superiority, or opposing cultures will target them to prove the other's failure. The actual humanity of the woman is overwritten.
I picture it like looking at a masterpiece painting, but over time, everyone becomes completely obsessed with the frame.
That's a perfect analogy.
We stop seeing the canvas, the individual human, and all anyone cares about is the political frame holding her. And the text expands this to how we handle victimhood in general today.
Yeah, the commodification of suffering.
Right. The author suggests suffering has become a political currency.
Because every society generates stories of profound suffering. But the defining question is, which of those stories are broadcast and which are buried?
And the text argues that in our current political ecosystem, a victim's narrative is only valuable if it perfectly aligns with the dominant ideology.
Exactly. If your suffering can be used as a club to beat a political opponent, society hands you a megaphone. But if your suffering contradicts the preferred narrative or implicates the wrong group,
Your story gets suppressed.
oppressed, ignored, or even aggressively discredited. The author insists that true justice has to be blind to narrative. It requires acknowledging human suffering without running it through a political purity test first.
And the book actually provides a chilling real-world case study of this in the appendices, right?
It does. The UK grooming gangs scandal, it operates as the tragic crystallization of this entire theory.
Just for context for our listener, this involved organized networks systematically exploiting vulnerable children across several UK towns over, many years.
Yes.
And the staggering part wasn't just the crime itself, it was the total paralysis of the local authorities, the social services, the police. They repeatedly failed to intervene despite overwhelming evidence.
Right. And the author uses this catastrophe to demonstrate what happens when institutional self-preservation, supersedes the fundamental duty to protect life.
Because they were afraid of the optics.
Exactly. The analysis suggests these agencies froze because the demographics of the perpetrators and the social class of the victims created an incredibly uncomfortable political reality.
So they just looked the other way.
The fear of navigating a culturally sensitive conversation, the fear of media backlash, the fear of being labeled, all of these abstract bureaucratic anxieties outweighed the literal cries of vulnerable children.
That is just horrifying. The system prioritized the safety of its own narrative over the safety of the citizens it was supposed to protect.
It's a complete failure of the institutional mandate.
I struggle to comprehend the psychological fallout of that on a societal level. When a core institution, like the police, fails that spectacularly due to sheer cowardice, how does the social contract even survive that?
Honestly, it barely does. It exposes the terrifying reality that civilization is essentially a shared hallucination.
A shared hallucination, wow.
Yeah, we all agree to walk on this floor, trusting the joists will hold. But when an institution fails with that level of systemic negligence, the floor gives way.
Right.
The psychological shockwave is profound because individuals suddenly realize that if the worst happens, no one's coming.
The cavalry isn't coming.
No, The cavalry is busy managing public relations, and the natural human response to that realization is a deep, primal retreat. People retreat into paranoia, hyper-defensiveness, and eventually absolute ideologies.
Because they're looking for safety anywhere they can find it.
Exactly. When the moderate institutional middle proves it won't protect you, the extremist fringes step up and offer a highly seductive, rigid promise of order.
Which naturally brings us to the next section. Because if those macro institutions are failing to protect the vulnerable, we look to the interpersonal structures that historically provided that protection.
Yes, the breakdown of traditional roles.
Right, and this leads into a massive, highly contentious area of the text, the crisis of masculinity.
The author approaches this by conducting a functional analysis of what traditional masculinity was actually designed to do.
Like its utility.
Right. Across vast historical timelines, the masculine ideal was inextricably bound to physical protection, the assumption of heavy responsibilities, and bearing societal burdens.
It was a load-bearing pillar in the community.
Exactly. But now, the seismic shifts of modernity have largely dismantled the necessity of those traditional roles.
And the text is nuanced here, right? It admits this dismantling wasn't a universal tragedy. Tearing down some of those rigid expectations allowed men to express emotional vulnerability.
The author is unequivocal about that. A healthy modern society does not require men who are valued exclusively for violence or stoic silence.
Right. But the crisis stems from the vacuum left behind.
Yes. We executed a highly successful deconstruction of the toxic elements of historical masculinity, unprovoked aggression, emotional suppression. But we utterly failed to construct a clear, noble vision of what a mature man should be today.
We tore down the old house, but never poured the foundation for the new one.
That's exactly it. And when you demolish a load-bearing pillar, the roof doesn't magically float. It crashes down.
And people wandering in the rubble will just grab onto whatever jagged, extremist scaffolding they can find to prop it back up.
That is a highly accurate visualization of the current landscape. The danger the author identifies is that the valid criticism of destructive male behavior morphed into this generalized atmospheric self-contempt.
Right, an entire demographic is constantly told what they must not be, but they're starved of an aspirational archetype.
Which leads to deep, cynical alienation.
Let me push back on a specific philosophical distinction the text makes here, though. Because it unpacks how we conflate destructive traits with valuable ones.
Yes, the signal from the noise.
Right, like we treat aggression as if it's the exact same thing as courage.
The text demands we separate them. Emotional withdrawal is a flaw, but stoic endurance in a crisis is a virtue. Dominance over others is tyranny, but self-mastery is leadership.
But what about power? Because here's where it gets really interesting. The text seems to defend power, but in our current culture, power is almost universally treated as a corrupting pathogen.
It is.
Right? Like if someone seeks power, the immediate assumption is they have dark, narcissistic motives. So how does the author reconcile power with moral goodness?
Well, the author redefines power simply as capacity. Power itself is morally inert.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of a massive rushing river. The river possesses immense power. It can overflow its banks and drown a town, or it can be channeled through a turbine to generate light and heat for millions.
So the river isn't evil, it's just capacity.
Exactly. The text argues that mature masculinity is not the absence of power. It's the unshakable willingness to bear the consequences of how you wield your capacity.
Wow.
A society that tells its men their strength is a threat, that they must shrink their capacity to be deemed safe, is severing them from their humanity. True virtue isn't being harmless. True virtue is possessing immense capacity and having the moral discipline to use it for restoration.
Which brings us to the author's exploration of the fatherless society. And they mean this both literally and symbolically, right?
Yes. Archetypally, the father figure represents the imposition of order, boundaries, and the transmission of wisdom to the youth.
So when a society is drained of those symbolic fathers, the disruption is staggering.
Especially for the youth.
Hmm.
They are stripped of traditional sense-making structures. The tight-knit communities are gone, religious frameworks are hollowed out.
They're essentially wandering in a desert looking for any landmark.
And that explains the magnetic pull of extreme online communities. They aren't flocking there out of pure malice. They have a deep, unmet evolutionary craving for order and initiation.
They want someone to give them boundaries.
They are begging for a voice of authority to say, here are the boundaries, here is the path to success, And if you carry this burden, you earn your place in the tribe.
And if the mainstream culture refuses to provide that, the radical fringes gladly step in.
With a warped, destructive version of it, yes.
And mainstream culture's only alternative is just consumerism.
Yeah.
The hollow pursuit of material progress.
Right. The messaging is just accumulate wealth, secure status, curate a flawless public image, and that inner gnawing will stop.
But it doesn't.
No. The author points out the tragic irony that we live in the most materially affluent era in history, yet we are plagued by spiritual emptiness. Material accumulation cannot solve an inner crisis of meaning.
When success detaches from values, it just becomes a desperate performance.
You're not living. You're just gathering evidence to prove to society that you exist.
Man, that's heavy. Okay, so if the macro institutions are failing and the interpersonal structures are collapsing, the burden falls entirely on the individual.
Which forces us into the third phase of the diagnosis, the psychological prison.
Right. We're looking inward at the individual who feels completely out of sync with this broken collective.
This is the most intimate layer of the book. It details the grinding friction between an individual wired to seek truth and a collective that demands frictionless conformity.
And the author focuses specifically on highly sensitive or hyper-aware individuals, right?
Yes, people who inherently see the contradictions and systemic injustices that everyone else just ignores to get through the day.
It's framed almost as a curse of perception.
It is.
Yeah.
Because they process the world at a much higher intensity, they see the massive chasm between what society claims to be and what it actually is.
This cognitive dissonance creates profound alienation.
For them, society feels physically and psychologically unbearable.
I picture it like, the canary in the coal mine.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, back in the day, miners would carry a canary into the shaft. The birds have super sensitive respiratory systems, so they detect the toxic carbon monoxide long before a human could. So if the canary stopped singing and dropped off its perch, you knew the air was poisoned. When these highly sensitive individuals start breaking down, having panic attacks, or withdrawing, maybe they aren't fundamentally broken.
Exactly.
Maybe they're just choking on the toxic gases of a sick society before the rest of us smell the smoke.
And that analogy perfectly sets up the author's severe critique of modern psychiatry. Because psychiatry operates in this delicate paradox. Its goal is to alleviate suffering, but it also functions as an apparatus of societal power.
Defining what's normal and what's deviant.
Right. But who writes the diagnostic manual? If a society is fundamentally corrupt and spiritually vacant, is it actually a measure of mental health to be perfectly well adjusted to it?
That is such a crucial question.
The author warns of a profound danger in a medical system that chemically corrects deviations without ever interrogating the societal suffering that caused them.
Like if someone reacts to an empty world with despair and the doctor just says, it's a chemical imbalance, take this pill so you can go back to your cubicle.
It's a secondary trauma. It tells the individual their clear perception of reality is just a hallucination. The author writes that the ultimate human agony is having your inner reality dismissed.
You get locked in a psychological prison where you doubt your own sanity.
But the author doesn't just coddle the rebel here. There is a stark warning. The text explores the archetype of the martyr of truth.
The messenger who refuses to conform.
Yes, like Socrates. He possessed the courage to ask uncomfortable questions that expose the elite, which ultimately got him executed.
The true martyr is compelled to speak out.
But there is a terrifying trap.
Right, because where is the line between validly rejecting a sick society and just drowning in your own bitterness? I've seen people start with a righteous cause, but over time their whole personality calcifies. They just become a vessel of anger.
The dark shadow of the martyr of truth is that righteous self-sacrifice seamlessly morphs into bitter self-destruction. If you make rebellion your entire identity, you forget how to live.
You lose the capacity for joy and love.
You become so fixated on the monster you're fighting that you take on the monster's rigidity. The text brings in Viktor Frankl here. He deduced that while we can't control the horrors inflicted upon us, our ultimate freedom is our conscious choice of attitude.
You have to have the courage to stand against the mob, but the humility to admit your own flaws.
If you incinerate your own humanity in the pursuit of truth, the truth you find will be entirely hollow.
So if you're that canary in the coal mine, and you realize that identifying entirely with your rebellion will turn you into a monster, where do you anchor yourself?
This leads into the spiritual frameworks the text uses, the spiritual battle between rebellion and redemption.
And the author uses some really heavy archetypes here, like the Antichrist. But we need to strip away the Hollywood horror movie stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely. The author doesn't frame the Antichrist as a demonic entity or even as hatred of religion. It's defined as the spirit of rebellion against hypocrisy.
It's that visceral disgust you feel when the mask slips.
Exactly. It is the mirror violently held up to institutions that have lost their spiritual mandate.
Like an institution preaching love but practicing greed.
Right. To be anti in this sense isn't mindless destruction. It's the necessary act of standing in opposition to a fraudulent reality.
And the text utilizes two massive archetypes to chart the paths forward from that realization: Lucifer and Christ. Let's look at the Luciferian path first.
The literal translation of Lucifer is the light bringer. It's the archetype of pure intellect, ultimate knowledge, and rebellion.
It's the human intellect demanding to know why, pushing past boundaries.
And the author acknowledges this Luciferian spark is vital for progress. We need rebellion to break out of corrupt systems.
But there's a fatal flaw if you stop there, right?
A catastrophic flaw.
Yeah.
The Luciferian path demonstrates that pure intellect devoid of wisdom inevitably metastasizes into supreme arrogance,
You start believing you're superior to everyone trapped in the system.
which leads to terrifying self-imposed isolation. You view yourself as the sole enlightened entity in a world of sheep.
Your light becomes so searing, it burns away anyone who tries to get close.
You end up intellectually supreme, but entirely alone in the dark.
And the author parallels this with Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche declared the death of God, the collapse of absolute moral frameworks.
Right. He stared into the abyss of what happens when the old values die. If humans elevate themselves above all values, becoming their own gods, the peak of the Luciferian extreme, it doesn't result in utopia.
It results in nihilistic vertigo.
Because if you deconstruct every structure, you end up standing in ruins with nothing to hold on to. You've torn down the prison, but you have no materials to build a home.
Wow. And this is where the author contrasts it with the archetype of Christ.
Yes, where Lucifer represents the arrogant ascent of the ego, Christ represents the radical descent of the ego and the selfless giving of love.
It's a complete inversion of how the world understands power.
Totally inverted. Worldly power asks, how can I conquer this environment? The Christ archetype asks, what am I willing to surrender?
It's about restoration, radical self-sacrifice.
And the impossible act of forgiveness. It's the profound strength required to absorb immense suffering without reflecting it back into the world, prioritizing love over the annihilation of your enemies.
So synthesizing this for our listener, the highly sensitive rebel who clearly sees the hypocrisy, what does this spiritual blueprint tell them?
It tells them their rebellion is only half the equation. You can use the Luciferian spark to tear down the corrupt system. That's the necessary anti-phase.
But you can't build a life in the ashes.
Exactly. You can't sustain a soul by simply being against things forever. You need a transcendent value to stand for. The Christ archetype provides the blueprint, a foundation of grace, service, and connection.
If your rebellion doesn't yield to love, it just becomes a new tyranny.
Precisely.
That pivot from destruction to creation is so crucial. And that brings us to the final horizon of the text, rebuilding from within.
Yes, the ground floor of practical reality.
Because we've diagnosed the systemic rot, we've looked at the psychological toll. But if the outside world is thoroughly broken, how does the individual actually survive?
The author calls this phase the death of the outside world.
What does that mean, exactly?
It's that profound moment of total disillusionment. The exact moment you look around and realize the societal engine is running on fumes. Your career is just trading hours for survival, relationships are transactional, public discourse is a gladiator match.
It's the chilling realization that there are no adults in the room. The system cannot save us.
And the terror of that realization forces the ultimate question. What do you do when the external scaffolding collapses?
The author argues you have to aggressively sever your dependency on external validation.
Yes, wealth, power, social media metrics, the approval of the elite, all of it must be recognized as fragile and worthless. You must shift your weight entirely onto internal validation.
Which is moral integrity.
Moral integrity is the final, unassailable possession of a human being. When the economy crashes, when institutions fail, the only thing that remains is the architecture of your character.
Did you act in alignment with your values when no one was watching?
Or, even harder, did you hold your ground when everyone was watching and screaming at you to compromise?
And the text brings up Plato's allegory of the cave here. We spend our lives chained in the dark, watching the shadows of status and money on the wall, thinking they're reality.
Shifting to internal validation is the painful process of breaking those chains, turning away from the wall and realizing the shadows are illusions. True reality is internal character.
And this ties back to redefining sacrifice. The author is careful to clarify that sacrificing for truth isn't about rushing to die for a cause.
No, it's not detonating your career to prove cynical point. True sacrifice is the daily discipline of living for the truth, injecting life, love, and honesty into an environment that has forgotten what those look like.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because it's easy for a philosopher behind a desk to write, choose responsibility over bitterness. But practically speaking, what about the victims we discussed earlier?
Right, the victims of extreme violence or systemic failure.
Yeah. When a human being is repeatedly crushed by a broken system, how do they keep their heart open? How do they avoid that Luciferian trap of bitter isolation when the world gives them 1,000 justifiable reasons to hate it?
The author's approach is incredibly grounded here because it does not dismiss the bitterness. The text acknowledges that bitterness is a completely rational, mathematically correct reaction to profound injustice.
Okay, so it's validated.
But the philosophical pivot is this. While your bitterness is justified, indulging in it means you are allowing the pain to conquer you.
Wow.
If you let bitterness harden your heart, you give the corrupt system the ultimate victory over your soul. They didn't just break your life, they broke your capacity to love.
You allow yourself to be molded in the image of the thing you hate.
Exactly. The author insists true dignity is an inner fortress. If your dignity depends on the external world treating you fairly, you remain a puppet.
Highly vulnerable to manipulation.
The ultimate freedom, which echoes Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps, is realizing you no longer need to prove your worth or sanity to a broken society. You choose responsibility because it's the singular way to retain your agency.
Choosing who you will become in direct defiance of the pain.
Yes.
It reminds me of the deeply personal testimony the author includes in the appendix. They wrote this intense text out of a primal need to be recognized as a human being, not a statistic.
They didn't write it as a match to burn down the structure. They wrote it as a manual for staying human inside a burning building.
And the quiet conclusion of the book is that societal rebirth won't happen through a massive political revolution.
No, it happens microscopically. It happens quietly in the dark when one individual after another consciously refuses to let the hatred of the world dictate the shape of their heart.
Darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's the exact condition that makes light necessary.
Beautifully said.
That is an immense amount of philosophical weight to process. To our listener, we promised you an exploration of the deep structure, and we went straight down to the bedrock today.
We really did. From the ontological horror of mass violence to the creeping alienation of the everyday individual.
We analyzed the fracturing of our institutions, the crisis of masculinity, the tug-of-war between Luciferian rebellion and Christ-like love.
And ultimately, the necessity of constructing an inner fortress of moral integrity.
The ultimate lesson is that a society's soul isn't salvaged by better technology or stricter laws. It's saved by individuals finding the courage to cultivate integrity and truth, regardless of the external world.
The societal X-ray machine might be broken, but the mirror we hold up to our own internal character still functions perfectly. We just have to be willing to look into it.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to sit with today. We spend a staggering amount of our finite time and energy meticulously curating our external identities. Polishing our resumes, optimizing our social media, broadcasting our political stances.
Just to ensure society knows we belong.
Right. But imagine if tomorrow, every major institution permanently failed. The global internet went completely dark, and every ounce of your social status vanished into thin air. Who is the person left standing in the absolute quiet? Cultivate that person. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Van Massacraft to Massacracting. Keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning the frame, and most importantly, stay curious.